Hello, welcome again to On the Mic with Mike. I'm Mike Jarvis, and in this edition, I'm joined by someone who is fantastically in love with Montserrat, and that person is from the UK, but is living in Montserrat, has bought property in Montserrat, and has been there for quite a while. Tell you what, I'll let pause for effect. I'll let Margaret Ainsworth tell us about her quote unquote Montserrat connection. Welcome, Margaret. How are you?
I'm very good, Mike, and it's great to speak to you. And I'm very flattered, actually, to be invited to take part in your podcast series. I mean, my only qualification to speak anything about Montserrat is that my husband and I absolutely fell in love with the island when we very first came, and that was in 2002. And I think since then, we've been in Montserrat every year and spending more and more time there. And it was around 2015 we decided to buy a home there and spend even more of our time there. And so we love the island. We also run a very small internet-based business. So we pay our taxes in Montserrat, and we've dealt with like the government departments like financial services, social security, customs and revenue, and so on. And so I think we've got quite a good understanding now of how the island works. In fact, we were remote workers before Dr. Sammy invented the concept.
Okay. Well, I don't know if he might have probably invented it for Montserrat, but yes, I see where you're going there. But tell us about your how you got to know about Montserrat and what about Montserrat fascinates you, what attracted you to Montserrat.
Oh, well, when we first came, we were visiting in Antigua. We used to have a sailboat that we kept in Antigua, and we were fascinated by this little island. And so we came over to visit, and I think it was the very first time we came. We loved the obviously the scenery, but also the people and the way they were so welcoming, and the whole attitude of mind that we met in Montserrat. And we've never been disappointed in that.
So you very easily transitioned from being a visitor slash tourist to being a resident. I mean, your Montserrat connections are very, very well established, isn't that so?
Well, I'd like to think so. We do we do what we can. I mean, we try to get involved in things, as much as we can. And obviously, I was involved with the Montserrat Children's Society for a number of years. I've stepped back from that because there is now a very young and dynamic group who are heading that up. So I thought that was a good opportunity to step back from that. But my husband also has been involved in a lot of sort of voluntary work and charity initiatives. And we try to take part in island activities where we can and where we're allowed to.
Well, certainly that is your vested interest, in a sense. But when you went to Montserrat first, you said, was it around the early 2000s, thereabout?
That's
2000.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
that would have been just a few years after the volcano started erupting, because during that period, I mean, it was still acting up. It's relatively, knock on wood, quiet at the moment, but there were spurts of activity, I think, all the way up to 2010. So all of that was happening, and you still made that decision.
We did. And in fact, we were on island when the last eruption in 2010 happened. And I think that was quite a an awakening to just how bad it had been. I mean, that was a very small incident actually in the whole scheme of things with the volcano crisis.
Yeah.
But it certainly gave us a flavor of just how dreadful and how sad it was what had happened to Montserrat and what had happened to the people, and the fact that so many people had to leave and so many people had, were still struggling. I mean, when we first visited in 2002, there were still people living in containers, in shipping containers, and that was very eye-opening for us, and very, very sad situation to see. There was such a beautiful island in such desperate straits.
And from my perspective, well, you weren't there uh, prior to 2002, but okay, so that's where I grew up and everything else. And Montserrat then, it still is now, but things are a bit different. But Montserrat, if we were just to go back to the A Studios days, the Radio Antilles days, the previous period of Radio Montserrat while I was there. I mean, there was a period in the 1970s that, in its own unique, idyllic way, Montserrat was a mecca. So, and then Hurricane Hugo was in 1989. That sort of messed everything up. That brought everything to a screeching halt. And I think just about the time that Montserrat was in the process of recovering from that, reestablishing itself, then quite literally, boom, the volcano came. And it was another setback. So to have those sort of scale of natural disasters back to back, I mean, it kind of messes with people's minds. And now we're having a conversation that, okay, we are now going to be in 2025, 30 years since the volcano started erupting. How has Montserrat recovered, or how is Montserrat recovering? So can I get your perspective? So from the time that you've been there up to this moment, what have you seen change? Is it changing for the better, fast enough? Just your perspective.
Well, I have to say, not enough change. I don't want to be negative today. I want to be positive and
Oh,
look
absolutely.
forward.
Yeah.
But I think there have been a lot of disappointments along the way. And it's been very disappointing to see the island has not progressed as it should have done, really. And I mean, I'm very worried about the situation that's currently how Montserrat is, and what we've seen over recent years, reducing population, the economy is at a standstill, the cost of living is increasing all the time, and then there is the international situation, conflicts all over the world, mass movements of population, oil issues, climate issues, and I do see, to my mind, the incoming government really has one last chance to turn Montserrat around and move it forward, because I think it's reaching crisis point.
And in that respect, reaching crisis point, and I think there is a general acceptance that we are at this critical juncture. But if I were to step back, just try to analyze it a bit. I mean, what has happened to Montserrat has been massive in terms of the social and in terms of the economic impact. So it would take a lot of investment. Montserrat is now in British aid, and it wasn't before. It would take a lot of investment to literally rebuild Montserrat. It's as if we're starting from scratch. So on the positive side, I think we can say, well, all right, here we go. We've been given a blank slate. Let's build a new Montserrat from this blank slate. But it's taking a while.
It certainly is taking a while, and as my opinion is that it is critical, and it is the next government, whoever they are, that has the opportunity to make to make a change and to move things forward. My view, if it's relevant, the critical factors are three of them really: population, increase in the population, access, and then housing and accommodation. There are other issues, of course, such as agriculture and health and education and so on. But I see those three factors as requiring simultaneous action because of their interdependence. We need population growth for the economy. Businesses on Ireland that are struggling to survive because they simply do not have enough customers and there isn't enough money in the economy. We need more people coming in, either bringing funds with them from overseas to spend on Ireland, or bringing in businesses that can generate dollars. And we need to be proactively encouraging that. We should have people meeting them off their plane when they arrive and hustling them around, helping them whether they need to buy land or rent premises or import goods. Or every government department should be geared up to give them priority and smooth the way for them, and not allow months and months of delays and frustrations that put them off. And then, but to get population increase, people need to know that they can guarantee to get into Montserrat when they want to, easily and safely. And they need to see that there are adequate access arrangements in place, and say we need a 5-year plan for that, and with a 10-year plan in place also, so that there's a substantial plan, maybe working towards a new airport or whatever it is that is needed to take the island forward. But we certainly cannot go on with the arrangements that we've had over the last few years, when, for example, the government doesn't seem to realise that Christmas comes around every year, 25th of December every year without fail, and yet there doesn't seem to be any forethought about access until maybe October, November, when there's a mad panic. People need to be able to make their plans a year in advance or even 2 years in advance, and they need to know that those arrangements they make are in place and will definitely happen. And so the sort of short-termism that we're seeing at the moment has absolutely got to change. And then, if you can get more people on Ireland, and if we can guarantee that they can actually travel and that there is good access onto the island, however that is, whatever decision is made about what that should be, then people need the opportunity to get housing or accommodation if they're more short-term visitors, and they need to know that what they need is going to be available to them. And so the government needs to have some really positive momentum to have decent housing in place, decent accommodation for visitors with standards. People expect to be accommodated in the same standards that they would have if they went to Hawaii or Barbados. Not substandard accommodation. That needs to be established and monitored, so that we're actually providing decent accommodation for people. And if we can't provide it with what's available, then the government needs to take some fairly drastic action. Maybe it's opening up areas that are currently in the exclusion zone so that people can have accommodation there. Or maybe it's just looking at properties and land that is abandoned on Ireland currently, or that belongs to people who have no intention of ever coming back to Montserrat. The government should be taking steps to get that back into use. We're a very small island, very limited of what we can provide. We need to make the absolute best of what we've got. And that's why I think those three issues, the population, the access, and the housing, have to be moved forward simultaneously, and with at least a 5-year plan and a 10-year plan that's being worked towards, and not this sort of short term, going from week to week, month to month arrangement, which seems to be in place right now.
You know, I sat here listening to you outlining that not only the common sense approach that you bring to it, but the level of expertise, dare I say, and professional analysis that you've brought to it. So when you spoke about the sort of three priorities: population, access, housing, and in your words, we should be dealing with these things simultaneously because of their independence and the need for at least a 5-year plan and then a long-term, a longer-term 10-year plan. But that's top level professional thinking, management, forward-looking planning, getting rid of the short-termism. I'm tempted to ask about your area of particular expertise.
Well, not really in that area. I mean, my background is in human resources. I was director of human resources in the health service in the UK for most of my career. So that's sort of where I know. But I mean, all I know about Montserrat is what I see for myself, and obviously I listen to people. I listen to the political broadcasts. I listen to what other people have to say. I was so disappointed, Mike. There was a parliamentary inquiry, I think they called it, into
Into
access.
access, yeah.
And so many people spoke. They were asked to go to the inquiry. They put their point of view. People with knowledge and experience. They were asked questions. There was so much information put into that inquiry, and yet there was never a report. There was no drawing together of all that knowledge and experience and all that time that people put into it. And there should have been a report which drew it all together, with conclusions and recommendations, which could have just gone to the cabinet. They could have decided what they wanted to do and go ahead and do it. And it's really disappointing when you see that sort of thing happening. And I think that applies also to, I know we get frustrated by all of the consultations that go on or have gone on in the past, and all these reports that get written. But actually, there is so much sound information in those.
Exactly.
And what we never seem to do is implement them. The reports sit on, I mean, lots of people have said about how they sit on shelves in offices. And really, there is a lot of good stuff in there, and they need to be taken down, dusted off, brought up to date if necessary, because some of them are now quite old, and I'm sure there are changes that need to be made. But it's not a massive job to do that. And that those consultancies and the reports that came out of them actually provide the strategies which will help the government to make their decisions, to take the island forward. But they do need to be implemented, not sat on shelves.
And I think that's where the value for money aspect comes in, because those reports and those studies and consultancies, they ain't cheap. Okay, those are done by experts, they are professionally done, so they have value. But if we do not act on them, if we don't implement them, put them to work somehow, well, the value for money goes out of the picture, and they're sitting there just gathering dust. Well, yeah, it's not serving any purpose. But the thing about it, what I find particularly interested in, the excellent points that you're making here, is that you are not only giving an opinion, you're giving an opinion of what you're experiencing, of what you're living in Montserrat. And I can feel the passion, and shall I say almost, and frustration to a degree.
Yes, yes, it is there. There is some frustration. But there are positives as well, and I mustn't be negative, because I mean, one thing that I think has really moved forward is a lot of conversation, a lot of involvement from people in the diaspora, for instance. And I think there's been a bit of a disconnect between people on Montserrat, and between some of the people on Montserrat and some of the people in the diaspora, who are Montserratians, who, I mean, some of them, they don't live on Montserrat, some of them have never visited Montserrat. There are whole generations who have never been to Montserrat, and yet they have a love for this island, even the ones who, you know what they say in Montserrat, not even born here. and
Yes,
and
yes.
and yet they have a great love for the island. And these are people who are, they're educated, they're intelligent, they've got good careers or businesses, and many of them already work as on a voluntary basis to help the island in whatever way they can, whether it's groups sending school books for the children, or, and I just heard recently, bringing in prosthetic limbs for amputees. There's so much goodwill, and that needs to be harnessed in a planned and systematic way by developing specific plans and working with those people who love Montserrat to engage their talents and allow them to contribute in a really meaningful way. I think one really good example of that I've seen is the Friends of Glendon Hospital.
Yeah.
What do they call it? I can't remember what they just call their group.
Helping
But
hands,
they
the helping
help
hands
it.
for
That's it.
Glendon. Yeah.
Helping Hands for Glendon. I mean, they are bringing in support and people from, I think, all over the world, and that is such a positive thing. People want to do that. People are, they're full of enthusiasm and really motivated to help, and they can help in a very specific way and actually see results of what they do. And we should be looking, not only people in the diaspora, but other people who also can be brought into this sort of Montserrat project to, to help to move the island forward. There are non-Montserratians on island. I believe Montserrat is now very diverse. I think there are as many non-Montserratians on island
That's very
as there are,
cosmopolitan. Yeah.
yeah, as there are Montserratians. And look at those people. They have come to the island from elsewhere in the Caribbean or further afield. Some of them have set up businesses here. They've bought houses or built homes, and they've made a real commitment to the island. And in many cases, their children are growing up having never known anywhere else. They
Correct.
they
Correct.
Are they Montserratians? I'm not sure. To what extent are they supported and encouraged? Are they invited to participate in planning for the future of the island? What happens when they want to stand for election to the Montserrat government, for instance? I mean, that's, possibly a step too far, but, for some people. And can I just say, put in a plug, a word
Please go
for
right ahead. Go right ahead.
people from Canada, the United States, and the UK, people who come very often for just 6 months or make several visits to the island in a year. Those people who own homes on Montserrat, they come to Montserrat. They only come to Montserrat because they love Montserrat. There are many, many other places they could go to, and yet they come to Montserrat. And they buy their homes here because they want to be here. They spend money here. They in shops and restaurants. They employ people, builders, plumbers, electricians, gardeners, poolmen, housekeepers, whatever. And many of them also are volunteering their services to help Montserrat, either deserving causes or charities. And I do wonder whether the government ever adds up the contribution that all of these people make to the economy and to the island. Is it valued? I have to say, I promise not to be negative, but sometimes it doesn't feel as though it is valued.
Well, the point is
Maybe it should be.
you're not being negative at all. I mean, you're talking about a lived experience. It's your lived experience, and you have the right to give your opinion. You have a voice in this Montserrat conversation, and what is coming through is not only your passion for Montserrat, not only your realism, but also your management expertise is shining through. And I know you said that you previously had a long career in human resources within the NHS. That's about management. That's about long-term planning. And that is what you are talking about here. When you talk about we need to have a more planned and systematic approach, and you spoke about the Montserrat project. I mean, that's the kind of thinking that I think we all appreciate. So I am going to keep accentuating the positive as you had mentioned it then. Given what you've just spoken about and the diaspora commitment and the Montserratians on the ground commitment and the people from overseas, I do not like using the term immigrants and expats, but people who have chosen Montserrat as their place to live.
Mm.
How do you see the potential of Montserrat?
I think it has great potential. I really do. I think Montserrat can get back to where it was before Hugo. We'll go back that far, because before Hugo, as I understand it, Montserrat was pretty well self-sufficient. Was was a successful island. Was an island that people aspired to, and I think it can be it can be that again. I know there are issues. There's that dashed volcano in the way, but as long as that doesn't decide to rear its ugly head again, and we can't live our lives waiting in abeyance in case the volcano erupts. We monitor it, we look at it. It doesn't seem to be doing very much. You've got to keep going forward or give up. And I would hate to see the island give up. I think the island should go forward and can go forward.
Well, I'm getting the impression that giving up is not in your DNA at all.
Never. Never.
But to get, and I like when you spoke about Montserrat being back to the pre-Hurricane Hugo period, because I mean, I'm telling you, it was fantastic. But then to get Montserrat back to that requires a joint effort. And as you said, we really don't have any time to waste. I mean, you spoke earlier on about, how we need to do three key things, and we need to do them together because they're so interdependent. But Montserrat and Montserratians and people who love Montserrat on their own, well, it can be done. I mean, let's not deny that. I mean, private sector can, get the private sector activated and a lot of things. And the private sector, all right, is already activated to a degree, but even more activated, and wonders can happen. But Montserrat still being, and I suspect will continue to be, a British overseas territory, albeit in budgetary aid at the moment, that joint undertaking, tell me what you think about this. I'm thinking that, well, it has to be jointly between the Montserrat part of it, Montserrat government, Montserratians, and people who love Montserrat. But at the same time, it has to be done in collaboration with the British government, because yes, they have done a lot, and a lot of money has been invested in Montserrat, but has Montserrat and the British government and the people of Montserrat really got value for that money?
I believe that there needs to be a major reset of the relationship with the UK government. What I see are the civil servants from the UK, droves of them sometimes, coming to Montserrat. And I'm sure the work they do is important and it needs to be done. But what I see is that they are driving the conversation. And they are employees, they are civil servants. Now, our government ministers are elected by the people of Montserrat. Our ministers have equal status to any minister in the UK. They should be meeting as equals, discussing the issues on Montserrat and reaching agreement on an equal footing, not working secondhand through the civil service and quangos such as ASI, the air safety people, and MCA, the Maritime Coast Guard people. I mean, we had an occasion recently when officials from ASI appeared to dictate what we could and couldn't do with our airport.
Well,
We know
that still
it
stands.
still stands, but we know there is flexibility within the regulations without compromising safety. And that is designed to support situations just like Montserrat, where access is problematic. And a similar situation arose regarding ferries. I'm not sure if it was last Christmas or the Christmas before, when we were forced to meet UK regulations, which may not even be appropriate for the Caribbean. So you end up with a situation where ferries that can travel anywhere in the Caribbean in perfect safety and yet are not allowed to come to Montserrat because the regulations are different. And when ministers deal only with civil servants, they can only quote regulations. They haven't got the authority to look creatively at solutions which could benefit the island and which could help the island to work better. So I think that's why I say there needs to be a reset of the relationship with the UK government. I mean, when Montserrat has those joint meetings, I can't think what they're called.
The JMC, the Joint
JM,
Ministerial Council. Yeah.
well, when all of the overseas territories are involved in that, we understand that there are other overseas territories who are perhaps more strategically important, or they're bigger, or they have a greater population, whatever. But they tend to dominate those meetings. And Montserrat needs to be on the stage. It needs to be up there. It needs to be putting its point of view very strongly. And just one meeting a year is not enough to do that. That we need to have ministers who are, have personal relationships with their equals in the United Kingdom. And the Montserrat office in the UK needs to be, again, much more dynamic, much more involved, and driving the Montserrat agenda.
Margaret Ainsworth, I must thank you so very much for taking the time to be a part of this conversation. And I think to summarize what you have spoken about, I think that you are saying Montserrat needs a big, maybe a final conversation between Montserrat and between the British government, dust off all of the reports, let's get implementing. And there are certain things that we cannot continue on short-termism. We need to do them all together to get the island moving, because there is tremendous potential and we need to capitalize on it before it gets later. Would that be a correct assessment or summary?
It would be, Mike. And it can be done. I mean, I think the government, as I've seen it over recent years, is not sufficiently dynamic. Now, I mean, one of the things, there is I mean, this two-party system in Montserrat with the government and the opposition, I'm never quite sure how that really works, because surely everyone has the same aspirations, whether you're in government or whether you're in opposition. And I'd like to see the opposition members much more involved in the discussions and the decision making. They seem to only, this may be an impression I have, but they seem to only appear at the Legislative Assembly when basically decisions have already been made. And usually what happens in an election in Montserrat is that, you know, that at least some of the people who are elected are people who have been in power in previous years. So they have experience and knowledge which the current government can use to further their objectives. And they should work more closely with them. I understand that, you know, there's got to be this two-party system, or this opposition system. But, you know, it's as if the government ministers seem to think that they are working on their own. They have an opposition with knowledge and experience whose objectives are just the same as theirs, and they should use that knowledge and experience. And they have a civil service. I mean, for the size of Montserrat, we have a huge civil service. And the civil servants should be geared with their objectives to working to what the ministers have decided is our strategy and our action planning for going forward. I don't understand the relationship between the civil service and the ministers, and the civil service appear to be managed by the deputy governor. But whether that can change, or whether the ministers themselves, just by means of being more dynamic, more decisive, having more concrete action plans in place, can bring the civil service along with them, so that every department is working to the same objectives and not sort of just trundling along doing what they've always done in the past. And I think that's, you know, there's so much that can be improved to move the island forward in the right direction. But all of those elements, I've spoken about the diaspora, I've spoken about the expat community and the non-Montserratian community, the opposition, the civil service. We're all going in the same direction, or we should be. And I think that's really, really important. And the government that are going to come into place after the October elections, they are the ones who have got to grasp the nettle to take it forward, and quickly, because it can't go backwards anymore.
Margaret Ainsworth, I couldn't have said it better myself, and I hope that the listening ears will listen keenly to what you've imparted, and we all work together to take Montserrat forward. Thank you very much indeed for taking the time. Wish you a safe trip back to Montserrat, and I hope that you don't have to spend too long in Antigua before you get your connecting flight or whatever to get over to Montserrat.
So too. We all hope that. We all hope that.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you very much. All right.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye now. Bye-bye.